Got a lot of thoughts, but no clever words. I got a voice that you never heard. Well, maybe not never, cause you heard crying. Communication's tough, but I'm sure trying. It's nice to finally see your face, and it's wonderful. A month ago, I was in your belly.
Hey everybody, welcome back to yet another episode of the Black Excellence Book Club. Of course, today we have an extra special guest star. We have Soretti.
Hello.
So this is a small film, that came out, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. You may or may not have heard about it, might be familiar with it. And we thought it would be fun to cover Reginald Hudlin's run, who was responsible for giving us Shuri. Now, granted, we won't be discussing Shuri as the Black Panther in this because it doesn't happen until later on in Hudlin's run. But I do think that, believe it or not, I think that some of the stories in this particular book, which is Black Panther, the Complete Collection by Reginald Hudlin, Volume 1, I think this is one of the best origin stories for T'Challa that I've seen. By the way, with absolutely gorgeous art by John Romita Jr., who I felt like did an amazing job. You may or may not be familiar with some of this because a couple of years ago, Marvel did a motion animated cartoon that I think ran on BET, and I think there are still some episodes that are available online that they literally lifted the art. They lifted this artwork for the purposes of that particular cartoon. But I mean, I guess first things first, I mean, the Black Panther has, literally an incredibly long publishing history. I mean, with his first appearance in, I think it's Fantastic Four 42.
I think so.
So, you're talking, I mean, and, he stands in that Marvel pantheon of yet another, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby creation. So, for anybody who's like, oh, well, Black people can only write Black people and white people can only write white people, everybody should remember that two Jewish guys came up with the idea of Wakanda and the Black Panther. So having a good heart and being a good writer will do amazing. You can create really amazing stuff.
Right.
So having said that, Reginald Hudlin is a legend himself in the entertainment realms. Reginald Hudlin is a director. He directed another small movie called House Party that you might be familiar with. If you're anywhere near my age, House Party was like your signature teenage rebellion movie growing up. Like, oh yes, parents are going, we're going to throw a party, trash the house, and break the toilet, and all that good stuff. So, it was a big get for Marvel to be able to get Reginald Hudlin. In some ways, we should be really thankful because if we had not gotten Hudlin on this, you never would have gotten Ta-Nehisi Coates' run. Because if you kind of notice now, since Christopher Priest, if you want to have a run at writing Black Panther, you pretty much gotta be successful, really successful, someplace else before they're gonna let you have a crack at it. So, first things first, Sorry, I just wanted to get your general impressions. What did you think about the story? Because I don't think you had read this one before, right?
No, I have not. So, which is I feel like it's kind of sad, but I guess this is kind of a callback to the other show I do with you, where it's using these book clubs as a way to get people to read stuff they don't usually read, right? Me included. It's like I read the Ta-Nehisi Coates run of Black Panther. We did. We used to do issue by issue book clubs for that book, and I did enjoy it. But it's having read this, it's I can see where a lot of inspiration comes from. I can see the inspiration for just the first Black Panther movie, right?
Yeah.
It's they pulled a lot from this, and it's wow, comparison. I mean, granted, you can tell when they pull storylines from comics. General and in these movies, but sometimes the storylines are not the ones you sometimes expect, right? Just side note, I read the I think Avengers Standoff event in Avengers because I wanted to read all the Sam Wilson Captain America comics as much as I could. So I read that event and I was like, WandaVision is kind of a lot more like this. Just fooling a bunch of people and changing their lives, and they get brainwashed and they think they have a bunch of different jobs, right? It's just that is what WandaVision was, but no one's going to be oh yeah, they took some story ideas from Avengers Standoff, which was pre-Civil War II like comic event that happened. Like I don't hear people say that, but it's like when you read the comics, it's like there's such a gigantic depth of what they used to inspire these movies. And like it's like, okay, now you can see it's like some of it's like obviously the directors try whatever they want to try, but it's like really funny just to be like, oh yeah, no.
Visually, you can thank Brian Stelafreeze and Ta-Nehisi Coates, because I will tell you that 40 to 50% of the visuals of that movie are pulled page by page. I hope they gave Brian Stelafreeze a really big check, because some of the stuff, it is literally a one-to-one transfer directly from the comic book.
Yeah.
But I digress. So Black Panther and his origin story. As you can imagine, any character that has a publishing history this long, we've seen multiple versions of his origin. Before anybody gets upset and worries about what is canonically or not canonically valid, let me tell you right now, the origin story in this volume is no longer the canonical story. The canonical story now is in Rise of the Black Panther, which they did it in conjunction with Ta-Nehisi Coates' run, which was done in part because they were trying to figure out a way of making Killmonger a better villain, because Killmonger was not really intended to be a central Black Panther villain, which, to be perfectly honest, Black Panther really didn't have any central villains.
Namor.
Before Namor we had Mayonnaise. It was Mayonnaise, and it was Killmonger. And Killmonger's distinction was he was a big, broad-shouldered dude who had a belt with spikes on it. But there is no Killmonger in this story. But so let's start at the beginning. From the very beginning, you get a chance to see what sets Wakanda apart. So far, you've got this invading African army that's moving in, and all the panther teeth and all that. So you see, even before you even see, and I feel like that's one of the great themes of kind of the whole book. T'Challa might be Wakanda's protector,
right.
but he's a protector of a warrior society. Like, the Wakandans are not shook, people. And so now one of the things that I feel like Hudlin's genius in doing the storytelling, it's not being afraid of the history of colonization in Africa. It's not being afraid of the experiences of the African diaspora. And I feel like that shows, because in terms of
my mother's hand, I feel the love stretching out like a rubber band.
And I feel like that shows, because in terms of he makes Claw Belgium. Now, why does that matter? Because you have King Leopold, who I think it might have been the only European monarch, because the Belgian Congo was not owned by the Belgian government. It was the personal property of King Leopold. Of which some of the greatest atrocities in the history of colonialism occur in the Belgian Congo, which, for anybody who follows geoglobal politics, if you want to know why the Democratic Republic of the Congo has as many issues as it does, take a look what happened for a good 60 or 70 years, and you'll realize it's kind of hard to live through anything that traumatic and then just jump up and everything works well.
Right.
So we get a chance to see the Belgians invading. And we see that the Wakandans are already technologically significantly more advanced than any Western power. Yeah. Which I thought was absolutely beautiful. The first thing, Saray, that I wanted to get your opinion of, this is one of the things that I love about Hudlin's run. During the time period this is written, it's written during the George W. Bush administration. Yes, which I found,
when you see later on, I see Bush, I'm like, this is hilarious.
Yes. So you've got your Condoleezza Rice. Right. So what did you think about some of the history and the politics that you saw in the early stages of the story?
I think what's so interesting about this, though, is like, other than like, modern technology, right, like an iPhone or whatever, right, a lot of this stuff, if you told me this was set now, like, it's not that insane of a concept, because that's just unfortunately how the politics of the world have not really improved much since then. Some of it's gotten worse, with just a lot more bigger manpower, people being less afraid to use it, seeing like, lots of the stuff that are happening in Northern Africa, and like by the Red Sea, etc. So it's just like, for me, it was really interesting, because it was like, okay, like, I am knowing some things about politics and like teaching myself and etc., learning about it. And it's like, it's not taking me out. It doesn't feel as dated as it could, technically feel, even though it's been like over 10 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like,
no.
2 decades.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that's the advantage of dealing with a writer who's willing to ground the story in actual historical events. Because what's that old saying? History doesn't repeat, but often it rhymes. So it gives the story a kind of consistency. One thing I do want to point out for you guys that I think is important, not just for the purposes of just fun storytelling, but for what's coming in the future. When you get halfway in, Everett Ross is trying to explain to them that, the best Americans have already gone to Wakanda. They've gotten their behind kicked. And they're like, well, who? They were like, oh, it was Cap. Now, believe it or not, so this little 2-page spread where this fight between T'Chaka, who's actually, I think it is T'Chaka, but it's T'Challa's father's grandfather, going toe to toe with Cap. One of the sneaky things that you wouldn't know from reading this volume is that became its own miniseries.
Oh,
there is an entirely separate small graphic novel called Flags of Our Fathers, and it just covers the story of everything that happens in terms of the Black Panther of that time period and Captain America and Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos. And it's got this great moment where Gabriel Jones, who happens to be the only Black member of the Commandos, how does he interact with Wakanda coming in from the diaspora? And I mention all that because they're turning it into a video game.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah.
That's actually really smart too.
Yeah. So Flags of Our Fathers. Yeah, so it was just announced, I think, at E3 this year. So the game is under development. It will be a couple of years before we play it. But
I think it'll be a great game.
Yeah. So believe it or not, this is what talented writers will get you. There was one issue of Tales of Suspense where this was alluded to. They literally extrapolated that off to do a 2-page spread, and then we're like, oh, we should do a whole story on this. So when I say that
like comics does that.
Yes.
They will take some, small little slip of something that somebody referenced, and if you hired the right writers, the good writers, they will go take that and they're like, I can do something with this. And in comics, they let you do that. They so I was like, this is interesting. Let me interpret this the way I want to interpret it. This only happens in comics where you can make money off of that. Like in a professional setting, because the reason why I mentioned this is like, I come from the world of fandom, right? And like people usually do stuff like write fic for that type of thing. Like someone's gonna write some idea, people write fic for comics, but like they'll find an idea, they're like, oh, there's like a empty space here that technically nobody wrote about. Okay, well, it's my turn now. I'm gonna write about this. But like, and people do this for all types of media, whatever, video games, TV shows, etc. that they like. But like in comics, you get hired, you can do that, and you get paid to do it, which is, I think, really, really interesting. And also, I think, makes comics different from a medium compared to anything else.
Oh yeah, no, I would definitely say with comics, there's always space for more storytelling. If there's an interesting story beat that we haven't fully explored, like, oh, miniseries. And there's a way to do it. One last historical reference before I move on. One, I should say, the United States wanting to send in, like, in this case, they're sending in zombie troops to quote unquote help the Wakandans. I would encourage people to look at the history of the American involvement in Haiti. Yeah. Incorrectly pronounced often as Haiti. It's Haiti. That's how. As they did in the movie, which I actually was ignorant to. Yeah, well, it's the magic of Western education, right?
Right, exactly. Crying. Communication's tough, but I'm sure trying it. It's nice to finally see your face, and it's
Black Knight that they created just for this story, which I thought was genius.
Like, especially after watching like parts of Eternals, you're like,
yes, it's like obviously this is not the Dane Whitman Black Knight who's an Avenger. This guy, he sucks, but. He sucks in such an incredibly useful way for the story. But when he's giving his speech and he proceeds to go, God works in mysterious ways. Centuries ago, we brought civilization, commerce, and God to Africa. We dragged them into the 20th century. I love how Batroc is the only villain who's self-aware, because his first response was, yeah, in chains.
Right, like he's like,
Right. And so then it's the three countries that are referenced as in they're, this is still the Black Knight talking. Now at the dawn of the new century, Africa needs our help more than ever. Here stand the representatives of four great nations committed just to do that. We have France, Francophone Africa. Yeah, I can literally have a 12-hour conversation with you on how messed up France's continuing relationship with its former colonies in Africa is.
I'm aware.
So that's one. Belgium, we kind of already covered.
Speak French.
Yes, yeah, true. In a world of suckage, let's just say the Belgians' involvement in the Congo. Yeah, on the list of scummy things humanity has done, that's somewhere up there. And America, I believe that's self-evident. I'll leave the rest of that right there.
Where? No, like literally, like my mom and my aunt both like took French classes. Like, granted, I think they found it like, good to learn another language other than Arabic, but it was just really like, I'm just like, yeah, literally any, like most of my French teachers in high school were like from Cameroon.
Yep.
Right? Like, it's just like, yeah, that's a nice reference.
Yeah, yep. Look, you're either yeah. No, it's spot on. The other thing I wanted to note, and I don't think this was done by accident. Please note the fact that what character did they select for America? They selected the Rhino.
Right, exactly.
As a big, belligerent, beer drinking, more or less nincompoop, who of all the villains was actually the villain taken down the easiest. That's all. So I'm just saying, Hudlin's having a lot of fun.
Yes, absolutely.
with this story. I did a panel for Baltimore Comic-Con a couple years ago. And one of the things that I've referenced, somebody asked me the question of why do we need to have heroes from different ethnicities? Why does that make a difference? And so
that's an interesting question.
It is. So this is kind of first my general response to that. What heroes are, they are aspirational ideals.
Right.
So if you don't have all of humanity included in that, you're basically saying only some people can be the ideal. So right. you need to have queer, you need to have disabled, you need to have heroes of every shape, form, or fashion, because everybody gets inspired by something different. My oldest son, Daredevil is his favorite superhero. Obviously, Daredevil has a disability. My youngest son, all I will say is that when Riri Williams makes her appearance in Wakanda Forever, my 8-year-old jumped out of his seat to yell, "Dad, look, it's Riri!"
Right.
He's not a girl. He doesn't have to be a girl. He sees Riri and he sees himself, and he's inspired by it. So I say all that to say, when you look at pictures of like Malcolm X or Muhammad Ali or Martin Luther King, you'll notice frequently they're surrounded by people.
Right.
And one of the things that I can't speak for any culture except for the one that I come from.
Right.
So I will say, as part of the African diaspora, our heroes are not like Superman. They don't soar above us. They walk with us.
Yes.
And there's this great moment where you have T'Challa saves a young boy at the very beginning of kind of like the attempted invasion of Wakanda.
Right.
And, his parents make him go, say thank you. And T'Challa pulls his mask off to tell him, God works through me the same way he works through you. There's nothing that I do that you're not capable of. And I felt like that is such a pivotal moment because it really establishes why T'Challa is such a different type of character.
Yes.
He's not just, I'm super heroic and brave. He's trying to be representative of his people and inspire them to be like, I ain't special, man. In 20 years time, you might be here doing this. So Reddy, what did you think about that when you read it?
No, I thought, like, first of all, I liked that the comic had like a hard, like, there's multiple moments that you're like, this is like hard hitting, but like I thought that like I enjoyed the fact that like that was like a very distinct thing that he wanted to cover. It added humanity to T'Challa. It added humanity to the child, and also the different like you could tell the different personalities of each of like these side characters, right? Like it's not just T'Challa's got the spotlight and whatever, minor side characters, right?
Mhm.
Like you have your side characters that are there for the plot, etc. But or like and your antagonists, etc. But like the fact that you have this child, you see his distinct personality compared to the children of like the field trip or whatever, and like the teacher or whatever. But then you have this child who's like his faith is so like obviously what he was taught or what he ended up believing on his own, etc. And like the fact that like you have Hudlin distinctly writing like T'Challa making that connection to like dispel that belief kind of, but and like which would have only been dispelled for an 8-year-old through T'Challa, right? Like no one else telling him like, oh, technically he's not a god, actually you could do it. It's like, no, the Panther himself tells you that you are capable, right? Like if we're gonna go into logistics and semantics, most likely not. That's not that capability, but like it's still like really cool. First of all, like it's just like it's a cool moment that doesn't have to be kicking butt. Like it's something that's profound without having to be like distinctly in like violence or romance or anything out there. It's like very human on a like technically a minor level, but has like depth.
Yes, which is the reason why they literally stole it for the ending for the first Black Panther movie. That's literally how the movie ends with I can't remember the name of the actor, but he played he was in a really great movie by the name of Moonlight, which if you haven't seen it, you absolutely should. Okay, yes, I will sing the praises of that movie to the day that I die. Fantastic film. But when the young boy goes, this is yours, like, who are you? And it's that, look, people forget that, look, if for a lot of young African Americans, they grow up someplace where you can have great dreams. It's something very different when you don't see anybody who looks like you living out that dream.
Right.
And so that's one of the things, like T'Challa is aspirational. He's supposed to be a symbol of what is possible, but to be able to achieve, we need to see somebody who looks like us. Like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. I can write science fiction. I've seen Octavia Butler. I know that. Beyond that, I was like, speaking of the characters, let's talk about Shuri for a second.
Yes.
One of the things that I love from the opening salvo is the fact that Shuri is a character, and I mean that as in she is uniquely herself. She is extraordinarily self-assured, and she is very much like, I love T'Challa, he's great, but this Black Panther thing, I got it. And so she's chomping at the bit for her opportunity to kind of begin with, and I felt like it was such a smart idea because nobody saw Hudlin's decision to make Shuri the Panther in the comic books. Nobody saw that coming. When Shuri's introduced, like we didn't even know that T'Challa had a younger sister, and it's interesting because. And for this version of T'Challa's origin, Claw is responsible not just for the death of his father, also for his older brother. So we realized that T'Challa was really not the next in line to be king. Right. He really would have never have been king if Claw hadn't gotten involved. But anyway, but back to Shuri. It's the fact that the first time we see her, she snuck out to get into the tournament to fight. What'd you think of that?
First of all, I love that, like, it was very distinctly her personality. So, like, it didn't feel like, like her building up to becoming the Black Panther later, like, you can tell from these first pages, right? Like, you can't tell that, like, if you were reading this, picking the single issues, maybe not. But, like, the groundwork was there, right? It was there, built from the beginning of her, being one, like, crafty. Like, I love that it's like, she had to sneak out. It leans into her intelligence, right? And also just like making her, like, also again for a smaller character in the story, distinctly doing something, right? Like, it's not just like, oh, like she, like, because it could have been very easy to just have her with her mother, or like maybe she's in her own room or whatever and she gets caught and needs to get saved or whatever. Like, no, she was there to investigate. right? Like, and then she distinctly put herself somewhere weird because she, like, did not want to just wait around or sit around. She went to investigate to see what was going on later on in the story, right? And it's like, so it's like you could have her, you know, not distinctly doing anything specifically on her own, like combatively, but it's like she was her own character doing her own things with her own wants and motivations and etc. And you could see that within like that story.
And she ends up saving Wakanda. I mean, she's the one who takes down the radioactive man, which, you know, if she hadn't...
With that sword, which again goes into her intelligence, like her being crafty.
Oh, you're absolutely right, because she goes, well, I'm obviously going to use the sword that just came through, that came from the sky, that could cut through solid rock.
You're like, I'm going to try this.
So I won't spoil any more of kind of the intro. The other thing that I feel I'm compelled to talk about before we move on, there is a great scene in the new Black Panther film. I will not spoil the scene, but I will say the following scene that we're going to discuss, it was lifted from this story into that. There is a time before when Claude is successful with his assassination attempt against King T'Chaka. They're at the Bilderberg conference, and the West is trying to get Wakanda to sell them their vibranium, and and after they basically insult him by basically calling him a socialist with a crown, T'Chaka's response is, I understand your frustration in dealing with a black man who can't be bought with a truckload of guns, a plane load of blondes, and a Swiss bank account. But hold on to what little class you have. Which I will tell you right now is one of my favorite moments in all the comic books. And I cannot believe that Marvel was like, no, we've read the script. Yeah, fine. Go ahead and put it in the book. And then they put it in the movie. But having said that, this is a big volume, so I will say yes. The first 6 issues cover who is the Black Panther. One of the things that I love Hudlin's decision making with just this series is the fact that he's like, hey, there are all kinds of other like black heroic characters. Right. You would think, in the fact that black people like black people, that eventually there would be some conceivable scenario where these different black characters would end up interacting and like hanging out and liking each other. I'm going to tell you, if you're looking through the book with us, I am entirely skipping over the House of M book. The reason why
because it's like kind of it's like what, a 1-issue, 2?
It was a 1-issue tie-in to the overarching House of M story, which for the purposes of just being clear, it's a story where, kind of like WandaVision, the show, Wanda basically has a personality break, and she basically decides to create a version of reality where the mutants are in charge of everything.
Right.
It's only in the Hudlin run because it's literally, it was part of the run at the time. Right. But in terms of the overarching story we're kind of talking about is really kind of not applicable. And we're also going to skip over the entire X-Men Black Panther crossover, which only really existed.
Fun.
I thought it was fun, but I mean, narratively, I was kind of like, they're only doing this because they're trying to reintroduce T'Challa and Storm together, so that when they get married later on in the volume, it's not such a shock.
Right.
Because I think I can't remember who, somebody else had wanted to marry off Storm and T'Challa, and Marvel wouldn't give them permission before. It just so happened when Hudlin went to do his run, they were willing to. I think she was in outer space at the time. It was something like that. But so we're gonna pick up on issue 10. Which, look, the 2 most prominent black male characters that Marvel has are Luke Cage and the Black Panther. That's the reason why you've seen 2 seasons of a Nick Cage television show, and the reason why you got 2 blockbuster Black Panther movies.
It's the 2 men.
So, but I love the fact that, again, T'Challa is something that's aspirational. You have Luke Cage looking at news clippings of T'Challa while he's sitting in jail, because he's like, man, I just want to be anything like this guy when I get older. So,
which I think that's another thing that, like, I think that the MCU, unfortunately, like, I think this is going to be any live action adaptation of a different like you unfortunately cannot get that rich of like an interconnecting thing between characters when you're adapting that way. You know, like that, like T'Challa being Luke Cage's like inspiration and making him be like, you know what, I'll let these people experiment on me, even though technically he doesn't really have a choice, but like he like reconciles the fact that he doesn't have a choice and like, you know, looks at it almost in like a positive direct, like, you know, making a positive of his like negative situation through like looking at T'Challa and like looking up to him. Like that's such an, like that is something that is unfortunately never going to really make it in the movies. Like if they do something like that somehow, some way where they do like a callback, maybe. But like I don't think you could get a start to something that way, the same way I think.
No, I agree with you. It would be interesting for them to see them try to attempt it. I think it's hard. I mean, I think one of the genius things of the Hudlin run is the fact that it's like, you know, it's funny. One of the things that I feel like that American blacks get taught is the fact that Africans don't like us. And it's what I found in the story is when you live long enough, you begin to realize, you know, Africans in the African diaspora have a huge amount of love and affection for each other and are, on average, much more likely to find a way to enjoy the hell out of each other than they are to beef with each other. And so I love, so look, Hudlin made a great decision to say, hey, okay, we're going to do New Orleans in the middle of Hurricane Katrina, to do some social commentary about that. Bring in Luke Cage, we'll throw in some vampires and bring in Blade, and then bring in Monica Rambeau, of which I will tell you to your point about characters and their relationship and its aspirations. T'Challa going to her and saying, you have the power of a goddess. You need to act like it. Like, in other words, I don't know why, but what's that old saying? You can't stand and you can't fit in when you're supposed to stand out.
Right.
And I love that that's his response to her. He's like, you just as fantastic as any of these dudes that are standing here. I don't know why you acting like you less than, or like you ain't got it. Like, I'm counting on you to save us.
Right, exactly. And also I just think that, like, I don't know. Though I will say I do kind of want to go back to your comment of, like, you know, African Americans and Africans and stuff. It's like, you're right. Like, saying that they all hate each other is a terrible idea, but it's also like, it's really weird, the separation, right? Like, it exists. It exists. I know it exists because my family, I come from African immigrants, right? Like those were, you know, like my parents immigrated here, and, you know, I was born and raised here, and it's like a very interesting, like, third culture shift for me. But it's just like, I feel like that's kind of like an unfortunate division that happened through like colonization, and not literally division as in like people got moved, but like also just like if people are not together, it is advantageous.
Yes.
You know? But it's also like some of that unfortunately comes through truth though. Like I've like unfortunately witnessed some of that division. Like it just exists.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely real. I mean, what I would say is that I think cultural ignorance of each other is a big hurdle, because I will say, obviously, because the same forces of colonization and white supremacy that were running rampant in the United States were you know, and let me say over the course of the Western world, were running rampant in Africa as well. So I guess I'll put it like this: like this recent film, The Woman King. So most of the people in Dahomey, they didn't know that story. The French prevented the story of those women from being told.
Right.
So it's not like they were going to go to Africa and tell you, let's tell you about Jim Crow and how horrible things are for Black. No, of course not.
Right.
So I think there's an issue of cultural ignorance, and I will tell you that Black Americans are socialized into believing that Western culture is superior.
Yeah.
Therefore,
the other way around. Like, the reason why I say this is because I literally had a conversation with like a Lyft driver, like the other day, where he was like, "Oh, I don't like driving in certain areas of DC or whatever," and he's like, "And like, you know, some people like they aren't willing to try and change," and I was like, you do realize there's a lot of things going on as to why certain things happen. Like, I was like, be it education, public education not getting funding, food deserts, the fact that like voting isn't as accessible as it could be, the fact that like and then like once you become poor, it's very hard to get out of poverty. Like there's like, I'm like, there are so many, and then he was like, "Oh yeah, you got a point." And I was like, well, I was like, this is very unfortunate that like I just like give you like things to me seem like pretty straightforward, but it's like, oh well, you can't, if you don't think about it and nobody gives you that conversation, you're not going to think about it, which is
I think the way that you start fixing things is you have to put the aspiration there, and that's why I appreciate what Hudlin did, because Hudlin was like, there is no reason for all of us not to be
hang out,
right? And there's no reason for us to not love each other. Now, with the exception of Blade, because Blade generally just don't like anybody. Blade is just contrary to be contrary. But so ready to close the point off. I mean, to your point, I can remember I got into a cab one day, and the cab driver turned around, looked at me, and he stared at me, and he was like, "You look like my kid brother." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Who are your people? Where are your people from?" And I was like, "My people are technically from Angola and Sierra Leone." He's like, I can't believe it. He was like, "If I show you a picture of my kid brother," he's like, "I can show you a picture of my whole family, and you look like you're from Cameroon." So for whatever divisions we want to try to, yes, if you actually go to the African continent, because as a reminder, Africa is a continent and not a country. If you go to the African continent and you go to a couple of countries, at some point you're going to discover, wow, I really like, no one can look at me and be like, that's an American Black. Like, no, they're like, yes, you're just another person with a lot of melanin. I will say, I did love the fact that the Confederates were vampires.
That's hilarious. Like, no, that's so funny. Like, it's just like that's another thing. I think, like, I just like seeing the intersperses of comedy in this comic, like, throughout from the beginning to later. You just like have like certain parts of this is just funny. Like, this is hilarious. This was a joke this man wrote on purpose, and then some of it's like actually serious, but it's like then you have a joke thrown in from like XYZ character, and it's like this is quite amusing, and also it makes sense. it makes sense. Also, another thing I thought was cool was with making all these characters interact is making storylines that were interesting. Like bringing Blade into the mix is very specific. He has to be there because he wants to beat some vampires. He's not going to show up otherwise. But he's like, oh, I have the opportunity to create a story where Black Panther and Luke Cage and Misty Knight and all these people, they're going to deal with vampires.
And it's funny because when you think about it, it really didn't take a lot, because perfect example, you could have just as easily have slotted Doctor Strange in this story. Yeah. But Hudlin has the intelligence to go, we've got Brother Voodoo. Why wouldn't we not? The story's in New Orleans. Why would we not use a black dude who I should say for the record, for a brief time, Brother Voodoo was the Sorcerer Supreme of the Marvel Universe, but that's a conversation for a different day. But it's just it's the willingness to use the characters, and then at the same time to be tongue-in-cheek about it, because later on in the volume, when Luke Cage is at Storm and T'Challa's wedding, Jessica Jones is teasing him. She's like, you really got to get off this Black Avengers thing. She's like, ever since you came back from New Orleans, you've been on this Black Avengers like she's like, baby, seriously, like let it. Because it's like, it's an absurd idea, which I should say there really was a Black Avengers comic book for that. I think it only lasted like 12 issues.
That's also really ridiculous.
Yes. As it's like, yes, black superheroes of the world unite. Let's like, yes, we're all brown and we're here to save the world with our melanin. So there's this small thing. T'Challa got married, to this character who I don't know. Her publishing history is almost as long as his, and while she hasn't had her own solo book, which
Really?
Storm has never had. She's had miniseries. I have never known Storm to have an entire. Oh yeah, which begins to raise questions, right? As in, you would think anybody who was one of the most prominent. Let me rephrase that. One of the characters that resurrected the X-Men, because the X-Men was a dead book before Giant X-Men #1. They were in reprints. Yeah. You would think that she would have had a solo book by now, but I digress.
Right, especially because, look at X-Men Red right now, and a lot of the stuff. Like, Storm is the central for most things that happen.
Right. Right. It's as if you're talking about great X-Men runs, Storm, everybody's like, oh, you can define the X-Men by what Storm's look is, and that sets the tone for the entire moment. You've got Storm as a goddess, and she's got the traditional costume. Then you've got the Storm don't screw with her with the mohawk.
Yep.
And then you've got the X-Men '92 cartoon, version with the silver outfit on, which is kind of again like the goddess, but also a little bit mix of the goddess and don't mess with me.
Right.
So I say all that to say, so Storm and T'Challa got married. What did you think of that whole storyline?
Okay, so first of all, I think that it is hilarious that so this is a thing where it's just this straight man funny at he's just oh yeah, she's okay, what about all these other women? He's like, oh, it's listen, but it's not, I wasn't as serious about you, blah blah. It's bro, it's you speaking of the beginning of the story when he's he tells this child, he's God goes through me as God goes through you, and then it's okay, and then he has a harem of women. It's just and it's not they were in a polyamorous agreement or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I would respect it if everybody was vibing with it. But the fact that he's for some people he wasn't talking to them about it, for some people he was, it's just okay. It's and it's to me, I found that also amusing because it's just I don't see the point. But it's also what I found also interesting though is that this also only happened. It happens so frequently with so many characters in comics, not just the men, because different writers decide which character they like to romance more.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I mean,
you decide that without saying, you know what? I guess you just like to sleep around. I guess that's the only way a writer can address the concept, right? Because depending on the writer. No, you're absolutely right. And I think the other thing that kind of creates issues is the fact that, this is a retcon. Until this run, because I think there's a note in one of the stories where it's see the Storm and T'Challa miniseries. Right.
These characters had never had a relationship before in any version of the Marvel universe. So now you've got to shoehorn all this stuff in. Well, it's T'Challa did date Monica Lynn for a while. Well, you kind of got to reference her. Then there was a history of Sue Storm thinking that T'Challa was the sexiest black man that had ever lived on the face of the planet. So when you see her being a little thirsty towards him,
it happened in real life.
Right. So
it happened in the comics. So I find it really funny, right? Because it's both oh my god, but then it's also just well, he has to acknowledge it as a writer. If you
right.
Some writers, they can be I'm ignoring it. I'm not even going to talk about it. But because Hudlin cares about what he's doing, and I'm not saying that other writers don't care, but there's the writers who are I'm going to write what I want and I'm going to make it good, but I'm going to do it. And you have the writers who are they hyper focus on all the details. They're I want to think about all of canon to the best of my ability. And it's sometimes that works in your favor, sometimes it doesn't. Or sometimes you make it work in your favor, but it makes T'Challa look kind of foolish. But it is what it is.
No, that's definitely true. So, it's funny. Hudlin did one thing that I felt should have happened for Storm years ago. And what I mean by that is, when I was growing up, African Americans, the attitude towards Storm was the following. We're really glad there's a black X-Men. We really wish that she didn't have white hair and blue eyes. Because it's they wanted to create a black character and then somehow keep that character separate from the black community. And then even in the early Chris Claremont Storm stories where she encounters Luke Cage, it's always kind of I don't get these Black Americans. You know, like it's always kind of like this. So the fact that Hudlin decides to go, oh no, when her parents get killed, you know, her dad fell in love and stayed, you know, and stayed in Africa. There, you know, her grandparents were activists.
Right.
It's like, look, it's making Storm a real child of the diaspora. Right. She's of African descent, for the most part, born and raised in Africa, but her parents are from the African diaspora, which ain't that damn uncommon. It's actually a failure. You know, if I couldn't count on two hands the number of my friends who were like, oh yes, I'm from Haiti, but you know, my mom and dad are from here, and I lived there for a while and came back. Like, there's a whole cornucopia of melanated people walking around who are like, yes, I am Black from multiple places. Right,
and different like it's a different type of culture mix, which is right. Like, I think also America, and like I guess you could say like the UK is one of the few like Western, like just places in general in the world where someone, like, it is more likely to happen where someone is from a place, then they're like their family's from a place, but technically that's their not like origin country. Then they back, and then they go back, and it's like this switch. But that's a very specific type of culture mix, right? That only happens in very distinct times and moments. Which ends up creating a very interesting person. Always. I think that always ends up making somebody with a lot of really interesting influences that, like, I think you would have not gotten if someone just didn't decide to do something. Also, there's a lot of weird missing pieces, which is not exactly a bad thing, but it's very, very interesting to try to put together.
And I hope I don't forget this, because I remember what it feels like when everything's connected.
We Captain America Truth, Red, White, and Black. If you want to try to figure out what that story was about, I would tell you one of the easiest way is either to pick up a copy now that it's available again, because it was out of print for like 15 years. The other thing is you can watch the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which literally they pull the storyline from. Yeah. But it's the fact that when T'Challa is inviting people to the wedding, the fact that he's like, if Isaiah Bradley's willing to come, we'd be on. And so there's this wonderful small panel where you've got Black Goliath, because of course, you know, back in those days when they created a Black character, they always had to slap Black in front of it just in case you didn't notice. But you got Black Goliath, you've got, you know, Monica Rambeau, Photon, Miss Marvel, so on, and you got Triathlon with Falcon and with Luke Cage, and they all know who Isaiah Bradley is, and they're all kind of standing in homage. And Wolverine's like, "Oh, who's that?" And all Cage can tell him is, "That's like the first me. It's a long story." It is for me. I love it because it's one of those ways of saying all Black heroes aren't heroes that the whole world knows and embraces. Some Black heroes are heroes inside the Black community in a way that maybe other communities can't understand. So I can say Kwame Ture, and in my community, there is going to be a degree of warmth and love and affection and aspiration, where in another community, they're like, oh, he was horrible. It's like, okay, our heroes aren't your heroes, and that's okay. Nobody freaks out when, you know, Africans don't like John C. Calhoun. Which, by the way, if you want to figure out like some of the theories of the Confederacy, check out John C. Calhoun. He was a really delightful human being, and I hope you can detect the sarcasm. So, the one thing I will the criticisms of this volume. So, the reason why Ta-Nehisi Coates deserves so much credit for what he did with the Black Panther is he was the first writer to say the Dora Milaje, somebody really needs to do something different with them.
Right.
If you look at the Christopher Priest run and the Hudlin run, they're supermodels with spears who are there occasionally to be useful in the moment to T'Challa, but not standalone characters on their own.
Yes.
So when you watch the Black Panther movie and films, just realize that
that's from Coates.
It's from Coates, and it's recent. I mean, we're talking about in the last 12 years.
Which is crazy because they're so distinct in these movies and they're so loved because they're great. Okoye is like the most amusing character, I think, of the entirety of the MCU.
But that tells you something about the fact that one of the limitations of doing T'Challa as a character was that it was always written from a very heterosexual black male aspirational hero standpoint. So of course he wants like I mean, there's a scene earlier in the volume where it's almost like a callback to like Coming to America, where it's kind of like if T'Challa was Hakeem and the Dora Milaje were the Bathers. Like there's echoes of it, and so it's kind of like it. When reading stuff like this, I always find it instructive to see how comic books have grown and matured over the time period. Where there's some stuff in this volume, especially with the Doors, you could not sell that now as a current storyline.
Because people would find it boring. Like they'd be like, oh, like it's not even just like, oh, because people are like more informed now. People are just like, I just want more from my story, you know?
Yes. And it's amazing what happens when you actually like, you know, give female characters agency and, you know, objectives and motivations and things to do other than just be really tall. In the words of what was it, our friend from not Wakabi, but T'Challa, with the guy that Forrest Whitaker plays, two tall Grace Jones looking chicks. It's amazing what happens when they're not just written like that and they've actually got something to do. So we're almost out of time. I should say that one, if you really enjoyed this, obviously there are multiple volumes. I think Hudlin's run goes all the way up to 4. It's definitely worth reading. I will tell you that I'm personally biased because I think the first 6 issues were the best story in the book.
Yeah, they're really good. Like the like for me, like I was just like, especially because I know for me, a lot of the books I've read are more modern comics. Like I haven't, like I think maybe the oldest of comics I went to write, which might be painful for you to hear, were like the 2008 Blue Beetle run.
Okay.
And like some of the Red Robin stuff. Like that's the like oldest I think of comics that I went on my own to go read, right? And then like out of that it's like mostly just modern stuff. Like I mean I've read some of Long Halloween, that's true. So like, you know, and a bunch of like some of the other Batman things. But like for Marvel in particular, no. You know,
yeah.
I've read maybe some older stuff, like just because it's, you know, at a certain point I was just obsessed with that. So. Yeah,
I mean, the only thing I'll say on that is I think some of that is generational, because I would say, like, you know, I was a kid in you know, in the 90s. Right. So for us, you had no choice but to go back and really, they weren't those many new comic books on a monthly basis. So you were going back. Oh yeah, no, I mean now that right. I mean, I could spend $400 a month and still only read a third to a half of the books that are being published. So no, I think you're absolutely right. But yeah, I think the old stories are worth revisiting because I think yeah.
Really good like first couple of issues. Like I was like, this is solid and make me engaged, and I'm like, I understand why they made Claw such a big part of that first movie, right? Yeah. It was such an interesting thing. Honestly, I think if they had maybe snatched more of the story for that first movie, I think I would have liked it even more. This was really good.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree, and I think it would have made a difference. I think the challenge with that is they were trying to give Killmonger something to do, because again, Killmonger as a villain. I mean, the Michael B. Jordan version there's a reason why the comic book version of that character now is basically a more buffed, even bigger version of the Michael B. Jordan version of that character. So I'll say, look, Reginald Hudlin's run is an absolutely, character defining run for T'Challa. So many of the storylines and story beats that you see both in Black Panther and both in Wakanda Forever lift from this book. So if you have an appreciation for those films, you should definitely check that out. And then beyond that, man, I'll just say, there's a lot of really great Black Panther stories. I mean, even while it might be dated, even the Christopher Priest stuff, when you read it and you realize that he's writing these stories in the 90s. Right. But yeah, great storytelling, definitely worth checking out. I can't speak highly enough about the quality of the artwork throughout the book, because the other thing I will say is with minority characters, sometimes it's the you'll get a top flight artist for a really brief moment, and then it's kind of like who's the new kid? Let the new kid do the Black comic book. So I give Marvel credit for the fact that there really isn't a single issue in this entire volume where the artwork doesn't live up to the quality of the story. So for all that having been said, this is Black Panther, the complete collection by Reginald Hudlin, which I don't know why they call it the complete collection when it's literally chopped up into volumes, but it is. And so yeah,
something, I guess.
yes. So I don't know. So we don't know whether or not we're going to have a Black Excellence book club in December. If you want us to have one, you should absolutely tell Fantom, and then we'll have to just find time to have one anyway.
I'm going to assume it'd be before New Year's.
Yes. I
before New Year's, because it's not going to happen on Christmas. I don't care about Christmas, but everyone else does. That's just the truth.
True sister from the diaspora, but but we will definitely be back with you very, very soon. I will also just say on a Black Panther note, if you have not seen it, the full Ta-Nehisi Coates Black Panther omnibus has come out. I will tell you, it is a downright ignorant amount of money, but it is worth it. I would strongly encourage you to order it from Fantom. I have loved every last part of it, and as Soretti said, Fantom at one point was covering it issue by issue, and so maybe if I can convince enough of you to buy the omnibus from Fantom will let me have like a 4-part series where we cover story arc by story arc. So give me my Christmas gift this year. Buy the Black Panther omnibus by Fantom so I can cajole them into letting me do I don't know, maybe like a Black Excellence book club every week for a month just to get to the omnibus.
I mean, that would be really cool. But also, I don't know if we would do that all digitally. But I don't know if people would show up. We'll see. Doing stuff weekly is a lot of work.
Yes, it is. But when we're talking Black Panther, it's a labor of love. So for me and Soretti, thank you for joining us for the Black Excellence Book Club presented by Fantom Comics, located at 2010 P Street Northwest, Washington, D.C., open for in-person and online sales, where you will find it, besides the fact that I think it's the 5th or 6th consecutive year in the row, the #1 rated comic book store in Washingtonian Magazine.
One time we may have tied or lost to Big Planet, but that was because a lot of the stores voted together, all the customers from all the different locations.
Oh, okay. So basically when the vote's not rigged, Fantom wins. That's one. And then if you've enjoyed this, you should definitely check out, our even much more irreverent, much more fun show, which is known as the Manga Book Club, which I affectionately refer to it as OK Boomer, where Soretti proceeds to get me to read books that I would never voluntarily select ever in my life. Either I come back and I tell her, this was so awesome, or in the case of today's book, which is going to be Chainsaw Man, it's the Soretti, you really got to explain to me why you made me read this.
I mean, I am excited to hear your thoughts and completion for that. Because, I think Chainsaw Man's mark on as a creative media for a lot of manga right now is kind of really crazy. The amount of people who have read this book and the amount of copies of this book we sell every time we get it in the store.
Absolutely fascinating. Well, you'll have to join us for the Manga Book Club for that conversation. Thank you for spending some time with us. Much love. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
We dance our way through life.
I don't got a lot of words yet. I laugh a lot and I just took my first step. I learned that no matter how strange things get, I can ride the ups and downs like a swing set. I forget what I used to know. I lose it slow, replaced by a life that's so beautiful. Being one with everything, I've forgotten how. But I feel the same thing when I see my mama smile. But it's different now, it's a big world, and I feel like I'm missing out. I wanna go and play, I gotta grow and change. I can't stay in her arms, it's the only way. But as I'm letting go of my mother's hand, I feel the love stretching out like a rubber band to hold me tight.